in the consolidation realm, what does the assess and identify phase look like? Well, a lot of it is determining your baseline. Where are you today? What kind of administration, application control requirements are you going to have? So as we have this dialogue here, and as you heard Ray speak about, you've got to go talk to the end user and find out where are we? What are we trying to solve? What is the problem and the requirement that we're trying to solve? And then based on that, you establish a service level agreement, okay? As opposed to saying, how much budget do I have? Let's buy that much stuff, right? So you've established a service level, and then you build a business case that says, all right, we have a problem. We know the service that we want to be able to provide. Here's what it's going to take to fix that problem. Well, those are the type of activities that go on in the assess and design phase. You're doing it, or your partners are doing it, but it's being done. It may not be being done in this formal and this organized a manner, but it is happening every time that you go try to put technology into an environment. Next, we would move into the technology acquisition phase. And so, again, what does that look like? Well, I really want to emphasize that what we're really trying to do here is say, look, everybody faces the real-world issue of, I've got so much capital budget to go fix certain problems. But if you step away from that and decouple the imperatives that you have, the things that you really need to solve from traditional means of what the color of money is, how do you get money and apply that, and you really say, look, what I really want to do is take those service levels that I identified earlier that are really going to fix my agency's issues, and I want to tie my performance to that and pay for it that way. Okay? And so that's what happens in the technology acquisition phase. And then, as opposed to taking the budget you have and going and buying X boxes that'll fit there, we would say, no, take the service level and the contract that you've drawn up and pay for that and provision the amount of technology you need in order to solve these issues and consolidate effectively based on that. And that is dynamic. It can change. And again, it's all the way that you contract that and write the language. So then we move into the integrate and implement phase. And so here is a lot of the doing. All right. So, but the traditional model would say, an organization like ours, for example, well, we would come in and say, we have to do it all. We're not saying that here. What we're saying is there are a lot of, as we saw, there are a lot of qualified, experienced resources in every agency that's represented here. The problem is that they're tied up doing things today that you'd rather have them going off and doing other functions that are valuable to your organization. What we would say is in doing this and in working through consolidation issues, things like the migration of all of those functions start to happen during that phase. That is where the typical project implementation, start to finish, earned value management type structure would be happening in a consolidation exercise. Support services. Again, this is the lifeblood now that it's in. And whatever partners, in a lot of cases, in the traditional or old school environment, have packed up their tools and left. Now you have to actually use that environment and make sure that it does what you designed or intended for it to do on the front side. Well, what does that look like? Well, it certainly needs to be, and again, built in on the front end of that process, needs to be a look back. We have depicted here quarterly, but it can be whatever time frame that you think, again, based on that service level, is required to say, you know what, I heard a question earlier. Well, what if it changes? What if the requirements change? What if a mandate comes out? Does that happen? Of course it does. Every day, every month, every quarter, every year in our environment. So what we're saying is those look backs, those quarterly periods or timely periods, say, all right, is what we provisioned and what we're moving towards appropriate to continue to solve that problem? If not, change it, adjust it, make sure that it is mission capable. It is also things like consolidated coterminous maintenance contracts, so that you don't have this ending here, that ending there. Well, the price point here is different than the one over here because they're not in concert and they're not working for me. They're really working against me. So we would say that the support services piece of this is absolutely as imperative as any other piece on the wheel. It is largely staffed by your organizations, helped out by organizations like ours that have experience in that particular technology. All right, so then we move into the technology refresh area. And unfortunately, as I said before, not really sure how we got here, but the point is that phase has always been we'll deal with that when we get new budget appropriations and budget cycles. And actually, I probably answered my own question. That's exactly why we deal with it that way, because we only had so much money to go solve the problem. But we would say, how about a different paradigm shift here? How about solving for that refresh on the front side when you're figuring out how much this whole thing's going to cost? How about saying, you know what, we believe, again, well, time will tell and we'll build in the right structure there. We believe that the refresh cycle on this particular technology we're deploying is about 24 months. So we want to build into this service contract that box, that I really don't care whose logo or whose label or what speed it runs at today, that box is going to need to be refreshed in 24 months. Put that in the contract up front so that we don't need to worry about that, and we won't get to a point where it's not optimized, but it's all we've got because we have no more budget to fix it. Okay? And then when we move into asset disposal, so this really is a lot of connecting the dots here where we're saying, look, these are real issues of there's information on those devices that mandate that you can't just chuck them out into a dumpster or you're running out of space and you can't just keep stacking them up against the wall. There is a proper way to dispose of them. And here's a novel idea. There's value in a lot of those devices on the third-party market. It doesn't work for every piece of equipment that's been deployed in a government environment, but in a lot of cases, again, on the front side, as you write that service-based contract, you can write into a concept that says, look, I know when I refresh in 24 months, that thing I just bought, go find me a third-party buyer out there, provided it's degaussed, provided it's clean, provided it can be certified in terms of its cleanliness as far as security issues goes. You can do what you want with it and give me 20 cents on the dollar for it or whatever the actual value is going to be, and we'll go find a provider out there on the open market that says, I'd love to have that in 24 months. So as you see this concept, what it really says is you can't remain dynamic the way we're talking about here unless you have a vehicle underneath it that allows you to remain dynamic. So these are great concepts, right? And it's easy to fill up a whiteboard or a PowerPoint that says, well, it's easy, do it this way, right? Refresh. But if that issue is stopped by your contracting vehicle, well, then you're kind of dead in the water. And they're interesting ideas that you can go every so often and hear about, but you can't put them into practice. What we would tell you is there are vehicles, there are contracts, there are buying mechanisms that will allow you to do everything we talked about here conceptually and do it so that the ownership of that, the burden of that is put on your provider and not on you. The accountability, the use, the ownership of the day-to-day application of that environment is yours.